Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Well, I love the movie, and in your introduction, it was mentioned that you didn't start out as a filmmaker, and I was wondering if you could give us a little background in terms of how you started your career and how you eventually ended up as a filmmaker.
Sure. So my background is actually in the hard sciences. I have a PhD in neuroscience. I worked as a basic researcher in preclinical studies in Europe for about 18 years. And my transition into filmmaking kind of came about during, it was a slow evolution, but was kind of ignited during the Bush-Kerry election, when the hot button political talking point became stem cells. And that was my field of study. And I realized that our country really is lacking in public understanding and awareness of science. And so I kind of made a detour into science communication for a period of time, and was working with other European scientists and social scientists and philosophers and historians on creating traveling science fairs that were going through Europe. And that at some point wasn't fulfilling enough, and I wanted to move more deeply into the storytelling aspects. So I decided to come back to the US, and I got my Master's of Fine Arts in Science and Natural History Filmmaking at Montana State University. So that was my transition into film. I thought I'd be working much more on hardcore scientific topics, but very early on in my introduction into the film world, I was much more drawn to stories about environmental justice and people on the front lines of impact.
Advocacy filmmaking seems to be growing in popularity, and I was wondering, in your opinion, why do you think it's becoming so popular, and what do you think is the role exactly of an advocate, when making films?
Yeah, I actually like to use the word impact storytelling rather than advocacy filmmaking, because I don't see my films as advocacy films. I see it as a way to reach people at their heart and to create change with the story. And I know that it's a fine line between the difference of that, but I guess I'm more sensitive and aware of not going down the path towards advocacy as propaganda, but rather impact storytelling that is based on truths and facts and can move people. I think it is becoming more popular and more accepted in the documentary film world in particular. It's not stopping there. There's definitely been, I think Don't Look Up is a great example of a feature film that has had an impact campaign associated with it. And I think over the last 10 years, I've definitely seen impact storytelling growing and funders understanding the need to put a film to work, not just to create a story and put it out there and for folks to see it, but actually to connect calls to action and deeper awareness and understanding of issues along with the release of that film.
As a filmmaker, how do you make sure that you're doing impact filmmaking and not just propaganda of some sort?
I think it's really looking at the root of what you're trying to do with the film, what the end goal is with the film. For me, it was with Youth v. Gov specifically, it was much more about bringing a greater understanding and awareness of the Juliana case and to provide a platform for these young people to tell their stories, much more than it was, while I support our children's trust in the work that they're doing, this wasn't a film for their organization. And that's where I really see the difference in that. I had full creative control over the story at all time points, and I was the decision maker on how I wanted this story to look, and the decisions that were made along the way in terms of what I shot and how the story was put together. Yeah, does that kind of answer your question?
Sure. Well, one of the big decisions that you did make, and I think was a good decision, was to really focus on the lives of the kids as well as the trial stuff. Why was that so important to you?
Yeah, I think we've seen some amazing climate change films, that have come out in the last 20 years. I personally was very moved by An Inconvenient Truth when I saw that. Gosh, how many years ago has it been now?
Yeah.
But as a scientist, I walked out of that theater very moved and very impacted by that. But I also know now, in looking back at the various climate stories that have been told, that they've been very factual and very scientifically based and very data driven, but they unfortunately haven't moved the needle on climate action and how the general public is addressing the urgency of the climate crisis. And so through my research of understanding more about climate communications, it was apparent to me that this film really needed to, the plaintiffs and their stories really needed to be the heart of the story. And while I wanted to relay the facts and the underpinnings of the Juliana case, because I think it's really important for people to have a better understanding of our judicial system and how it works, and how our government is failing us, and to have a greater understanding of how our environmental rights intersect with our constitutional rights. Those were like the facts of the film, but they're not the heart of the film. So bringing in the very personal stories of the plaintiffs was for me the way that I wanted to connect with my audience, and for them to really feel what these young people are experiencing.
At exactly what point did you get involved in telling the story that's in the movie? Because uh, it took many years for this story to unfold. And did you realize right from the beginning that this was going to be a story that was worth filming?
So back in 2011, when she first started her organization, when she first founded Our Children's Trust, she filed legal um, she filed legal cases, or not all lawsuits, but some petitions for rulemaking in every state across the country on Mother's Day, as well as the first federal case. And in 2011, together with a partnership through Witness, which is a social justice human rights organization based out of Brooklyn, it's Peter Gabriel's organization, I helped create a series of 10 short films that was focused on the state plaintiffs' stories. They were not based on the cases or the legalities. They were really truly about their climate impacts and injuries. And the stories were based on their standing declarations. So we were able to file to actually submit these short films before the judges in their court cases. And that was really the first introduction to me to some of these plaintiffs. That was when I met Shutescott and Kelsey and Jamie. They were all part of this short film series, and they all, in addition to now being on this federal case, they were suing their state governments at the time. So I've known Shutescott since he was 11, Kelsey since she was 15, Amy since she was 8. And in 2015, when they filed the new federal lawsuit, I was watching it from, afar. I had developed a relationship with Julia and the legal team at that point, and had been throughout the years going to environmental law conferences and, trying to kind of beef up my legal knowledge. So when they had their first win with Judge Coffin in the spring of 2016, that was kind of the moment that I put all my eggs in one basket and said, okay, this is it. I feel like this is going somewhere. And I had always felt the need with the short stories that there was something more there.
Obviously, the most important thing was, them and their case. But as a filmmaker, selfishly, you must, as you're going through this whole process, hope for certain outcomes in terms of how it's going to affect your movie. It must have been very nerve-wracking just for you personally, as they went from case to case and, argument to argument. How did you know, how long to stick with it, or when to call it quits, and, when to wrap up your film? Because it seems like it's still going on now.
Yeah, it's a good question. For a long time, I was just trying to cover everything and cover all angles, and I didn't really know, what the outcome was going to be. And it certainly drew on a lot longer than I had ever anticipated. I think probably one of the most disappointing moments for the film team as well as for the plaintiffs was when the trial was put on hold. You know, I had moved out to Oregon and was planning on being there for 3 months during the 12-week long trial, and that was a big upheaval for me personally, with my family and with my film team, and to see that kind of all just like days before the trial kind of collapse and fall apart. And that felt like it was supposed to be the culmination, you know, the high point of the film was to actually see all this evidence presented in trial. So those, you know, those moments, those of uncertainty were really, really difficult at times. But I brought on Olivia Ahnemann, who's my producing partner in this film. I brought her on about 3 years ago, and that was really with the hope and the goal of trying to figure out how do we finish this up, how do we wrap this film up, and following the film out to the Ninth Circuit Court decision felt like a natural place to end, and to leave the film, obviously knowing that there's more to come. And you know, that was that was almost 2 years ago now since that decision in the Ninth Circuit Court, and the case is still ongoing. The plaintiffs had a hearing last June. They have filed a motion to amend their complaint to put it more in line with how the Ninth Circuit Court ruled. So they're asking the courts to allow them to put the focus on the declaratory relief aspect of their claim. And we've been waiting since June from Judge Aiken to rule on this. We're very hopeful that she's going to rule in the plaintiff's favor, which would then put the case back on the trajectory to go to trial. And I think it's important always for folks who don't understand as much about the legal system to know that every court hearing that you saw in the film was a procedural hearing. The young people have never been able to present their evidence before the courts. There's never been any rulings based on the merits of the case. These have all been procedural rulings and procedural shenanigans, basically, by the government. So I think that was important. At some point, I knew that it was more important for me to get the story out there and to build awareness about this than to hold on to the very last moment of wherever this case was supposed to land.
If they do get their opportunity, will you be there to film it?
We will definitely be there. I'm not exactly sure what that looks like and, you know, what shape and form it will take, but we will definitely be there for the trial, trying to capture as much as possible.
Just out of curiosity, it seems that sometimes you're allowed to bring the camera in a courtroom, sometimes you're not. What determines that?
So our federal district courts never allow recording devices in the courtrooms. So that's why Judge Aiken's courts were always off limits for that. But the circuit courts have those courts are allowed to decide whether or not they want to allow recording of audio or video in their courts. So both of the circuit court cases that I depicted in the film, not only was I allowed to film, but they actually projected it to spillover courtrooms, and also in a park in Portland, Prospect Park in Portland, where folks outside were actually able to watch the hearing as well.
I know a lot of people are calling this film inspiring, and I guess there's a hope that, kind of like An Inconvenient Truth, this film will be shown in classrooms all over the world. Maybe it is already. What are your goals for this movie in terms of education?
Yeah, we actually launched our educational distribution last month. So we're really excited about that. We're working together with Good Docs, which is a smaller boutique educational distributor, but they take on primarily films with impact, so some kind of social justice angle. So we're really excited about working with them. Sarah Feinblum, who runs that program, has a lot of really great connections through schools and universities around the country. So we're already receiving lots of requests to get this film into middle schools, high schools, and universities. And what's really been fun as well is getting it into law schools. There's been a lot of requests around the country because the Juliana case is being taught in law programs. So we're working on that as well as international educational institutions. And yeah, we're really excited about that. We're, as part of our impact campaign, we're trying to raise some funds as well so that we can provide the educational licenses for free to middle schools and high schools, because we feel that this film should, you know, we would love for it to be freely available, but we need to cover our costs, obviously, and would love to be able to just provide a grant for that, so that it can be free for those schools that definitely cannot afford to pay a license fee.
I know people here have a lot of questions, hopefully, but I'm just curious, with everything that's going on in the world right now, in Ukraine, with Russia, people here, at least a lot of people I'm talking to, are getting very nervous about the price of gas as it goes up. And yet, I would imagine that you and others who are concerned about the environment are fearful that people are going to demand that they do more drilling here in the country to relieve, you know, the price that they're paying at the pump. Is this a concern that people are going to start demanding that we do more here after all the good work that's been done in that regard?
Absolutely. Two points, I guess, to your question. I struggle to see how much work has been done on that front, because we continue to open up, you know, public lands for oil and gas drilling. I think under the Biden administration, he's already permitted more oil and gas infrastructure than under the Trump administration.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
And I obviously Ukraine, I mean, listening just to the State of the Union speech, it was pretty clear that we're not talking about solving this problem through transitioning to renewables. We're talking about how to get oil and gas energy independence. And I think it's a missed opportunity, similar to what we've experienced through the decades, you know, of the oil crisis in the 70s. We didn't continue along the path that Carter had started towards renewables and that Nixon had started. Instead, we beefed up the coal industry. So I think we're at another one of these, you know, really critical points in history where we have some big choices to make. And while gas prices are increasing, I think it's really important for the American people to excuse me, to remember what the Ukrainians are experiencing, you know, in their own home country, and the significance of that. And I think we also know that transitioning onto renewable energy is also there's going to be a price for it, and we will have to bite that bullet, and there will be some costs that we will experience in order to make that transition. But ultimately, it's going to be the better, more sustainable choice for the long haul.
What was the most satisfying thing about making this film for you?
Oh, it was a real life-changing experience for me. I think developing relationships with all the young people and seeing them, seeing what they've become, seeing what they've grown into, and how this case and the work that they've done has changed their lives as well. Most of these kids they didn't come into this because they were climate activists or environmental activists. They were part of this case because they were experiencing real climate harms. Some of them incredibly shy to start out with when I first met them, and awkward on camera and awkward in public speaking, and you know, to see how doing this work has really been empowering for them and has really shaped their lives as young adults now, many of them. I think I think that was probably one of the most amazing parts of working on this.
That sounds great. Well, we want to see if anyone here has any questions, and give them a chance. So if anyone...
Your theater looks really beautiful.
Very historic. Any questions?
Good in contact with Alan Walden. That is a foundation. The question is we had any contact with Alan Alda, who I believe has a foundation to try and promote the understanding of science to the general public. I saw him as part of a program back in Rockefeller, and the Rockefeller University talked about epigenetics. So I wonder if he is involved in this in any way. Might be.
Was the last part of the question?
I wonder if he is someone who might be a resource in helping facilitate understanding of these important issues.
What did you, Tom, can you repeat, what's his name? Alan Aldo? Is that what he said?
Alan Alda from Nash, the actor.
Oh, okay, Alan Alda, yeah.
There's a foundation, I believe, too.
Yeah.
That would, kind of intersect that thing.
Yeah, I actually have not connected with him. One thing that we haven't discussed yet is we have an impact campaign associated with this film that is very focused on empowering and supporting young people in particular, but all people to hold their governments accountable on the climate crisis. So we're working with some local groups and with nonprofits across the country. When we do a lot of these impact screenings, we're trying to bring local nonprofits into the picture in order to give people local actions that they can plug into that are focused on government accountability. We're also doing work on the ground with government outreach, because the plaintiffs and the legal team cannot be in contact with any of the defendants. A lot of the work that we're doing is trying to do outreach within the Biden administration and on the Hill. So as part of the impact campaign, obviously we're fundraising, and his organization would be a really great one to connect with as a potential partner. So thanks for mentioning that. I was taking notes while you were talking.
Anyone else have questions over there?
We didn't seem to get into potential politicization of courts. I wonder whether you avoided that or wasn't really an issue, when you chose to avoid questions like that.
Was the question whether I chose purposely to avoid the politicization of climate change?
The politicization
Of the courts.
and how that impacted this whole issue, big oil, big government, etc.
Yeah, well, we chose not to, obviously also when we went into post-production, let's see, we started in October of 2019 was when we started editing the film, and a lot has happened since then. And we chose not to try to dive too much into the politicization of SCOTUS and what is happening with the Supreme Court, because, well, it kind of takes us a little bit off topic. We all know what the risk is of going up to the Supreme Court, and we know what's happening right now with our Supreme Court, but we also really wanted to highlight the importance of our judicial system, and that these plaintiffs really still do believe in the validity and the promise and the hope of our third branch of government, which is, supposed to step in when the other two branches are actively engaged in harming the citizens. So that was really, where we were trying to focus on, and not to create a polarization or politicization of speaking actually about the courts themselves.
Christy, can I ask you one more question? This is Tom. It obviously wasn't the focus of the movie, but I've seen so many other environmental documentaries, and it's something that often comes up in these other films is that when people will fight against the oil companies, especially around the world, they do so at a risk. Like some of them end up in physical danger. There's threats, families are threatened.
There's death.
Yeah, there's death, there's, wiretapping. Was any of that kind of stuff going on? I know it wasn't the focus of your movie, but get kids involved, or the group had kids involved. I was wondering about that.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. It was kind of hard sometimes to know maybe where threats were coming from. While the fossil fuel industry was actively involved as defendants in the case, there were some strange things that happened to some of us. I had all of my bank accounts hacked with all of my credit cards, which was a little disturbing to have just across the board everything hacked and dug into. And I know that there were some other things that happened that I'm not at liberty to talk about. But once they left the case in 2018, the summer of 2018, and it was really just the kids against the government, I don't really remember or think that there were any active threats necessarily, not at all from the government or from the defendants. I think there was more concern about lashback in social media and how people responded to articles or posts or attacks to the plaintiffs themselves through social media, and that happened. And it's just kind of the nature of our society now and how people choose to use social media. And the plaintiffs got really good at just not engaging and not looking at that stuff, and really not letting it impact them.
I'm sorry that happened to you though. Okay. Anyone else have some questions?
Here. At the end of the movie, you indicated that similar cases were going on around the world, and I wondered if you could elaborate on that a little.
Yeah, so the Juliana case specifically has inspired 25 cases, international cases around the world that have been brought before these countries' governments by young people based on these countries' constitutions. And Our Children's Trust and Julia and her legal team have been actively involved in supporting these cases. Some of them have had wins, as you saw at the end of the film, some positive rulings, and some that are carrying on, and there's new cases being brought all the time. We also have ongoing state cases here in the United States brought by Our Children's Trust. In fact, the Held versus Montana case, it's the Montana state case, is going to be the very first climate change lawsuit that is going to trial. And it is scheduled to go to trial next February in Montana. So I would really encourage, if people want to, keep up on these cases, I would encourage you to go to ourchildrenstrust.org, and you can follow these various cases. They're really good at keeping, updates on their website about the various briefs and motions that are taking place in these cases. And I would encourage you to follow and support the Montana plaintiffs. This is going to be a really important case.
Any other questions? Okay, I think that's about it. It's a wrap. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Any questions? And wish you all the best with moving forward with the film and the impact campaign. I hope some people check out the website. Did you mention the website?
Yeah, our website is youthbgovfilm.com.
That should be easy. youthbgovfilm.com.
Yeah. And thank you, Wendy and Tom, so much for having your film as part of your film series. We're really excited to be able to show it to